Well, Gulnur Aybet joins us now in the studio. She's the Director of the Centre for Security Studies at BAUCESS University. Gulnur, once again, thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you.
Now, Ataturk Airport did have better security than airports like Brussels. More people died in this particular attack at the airport, though. Do you think that this particular airport in Istanbul is a vulnerable target? And did Turkey do enough? Were there any holes in Turkey's security situation here?
Well, like you mentioned, Ataturk Airport is probably much more safely guarded than most international airports around the world, because in order to go in there, you have to go through these security checkpoints where all your baggage has to be scanned. So even if you're seeing someone off at the airport, you need to go through this security check, not just the passengers. So the terrorists couldn't get beyond that barrier. But if it's a sort of reasonably busy time, and it always is in Ataturk Airport, chances are there'll be quite a long queue of people waiting to get into the airport, waiting for their baggage to be scanned. So the immediate casualties were the people who were standing in that area, because the terrorists first opened fire, causing havoc, and then they blew themselves up. So, you know, it was contained within that area, but the casualties are still high, because we think that there were probably quite a few people already going in there. It's very difficult. I mean, if you try to control every single vehicle that's going into a very busy airport and do a sort of in-depth search of every vehicle, that's practically impossible. So I don't know how one goes about screening for this kind of terrorist attack, because obviously they must have got that far in a car. They couldn't have walked up to the terminal. And so the machine guns that they were using, the bomb vests, they must have been in the vehicle, or maybe perhaps on them when they went through the security checkpoint. And unless the police at the checkpoint find something very suspicious, they're not going to do an in-depth search of the car. But you would assume that they would have, since it was such a professionally calculated attack, they would have camouflaged themselves quite skillfully at the entrance.
Certainly seems like a very well coordinated attack.
It seems like that, yes.
Now, the Prime Minister has come out, and so has Erdogan, has come out and pointed to Daesh for this attack. Just give us an idea about what is it that this attack points to Daesh, and also perhaps your assessment of Turkey's security plan around their fight against Daesh. They obviously have their own domestic terrorism at hand that they have to deal with as well. What are they doing to fight Daesh, and how much international pressure is on them to do so?
Well, initially when the attack came, I mean, I thought it's either Daesh or PKK, because Turkey is actually fighting a two-pronged war against terror. And of course, they're quite separate from each other. And their goals are separate, but they're both linked to the war in Syria. So anything that happens with regards to the situation on the ground in Syria and Turkey's regional relations is going to directly impact Turkey's war on terror, which is not just fighting Daesh, but also the PKK. Now, Turkey's recent agreement of normalizing relations with Israel, I think, has a lot to do with this. Because if we see, increased intelligence sharing once again with Israel, that's going to put another squeeze on Daesh. And Daesh are already being squeezed on the ground in both Iraq and Syria. So in this sort of desperate attempt, particularly, I mean, I think Daesh's strategy has been to terrorize and target and threaten Muslims or Muslim countries that are within the coalition. They feel that this is this is much worse than, say, non-Muslims waging war on Daesh. So, for example, recently on their website, they had threatened a long list of prominent British Muslims, saying that, they were, traitors to their faith and so forth. So I think, Turkey has stepped up. Turkey stepping up its role in the coalition against Daesh, and the use of obviously Incirlik Air Base for the coalition jets that are taking off. All of these have an enormous impact on Daesh's immediate plans of destruction in Turkey. And of course, proximity-wise, Turkey is much closer to where Daesh are based at the moment. But the other thing is, of course, this is very different from other terrorist cells that we used to know, other terrorist operations that had an integrated command. These are practically virtual cells like Paris. When the attack happens, it's very difficult afterwards to find the trail. It just dies after a while.
Just on that though, I mean, Daesh has obviously chosen Istanbul. Is that also a case of easy access? Is Turkey doing enough to secure its border?
Well, big cities are always and big metropolises are very, very attractive for terrorists. I mean, we saw this with Paris, then we saw this with Brussels, because urban areas, and this was actually highlighted recently in a military conference, that, the future warfare is going to focus on urban areas. Because these are sort of vulnerable pockets where, individual groups like terrorists and non-state actors and criminals can have wider access to these very fluid networks that they use. And fluid networks find it easier to work in big cities. So this is not, I think, just a problem that you can confine so much to Turkey. It's a global problem because these networks are global. That's why we need to have much more stringent and intense international cooperation against these very, if you like, phantom cells, virtual cells that use very tangible, real networks that are global but also very fluid.
No, certainly the efforts on the ground in Syria are ongoing in that regard.
Yes.
Gulnur, I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much for your insight.